Peter R. Breggin, MD, is called the conscience of psychiatry for his many decades of successful reform efforts. His scientific and educational work provide the foundation for modern criticism of drugs and ECT, and lead the way in promoting more caring and effective therapies. His books include Talking Back to Prozac, Toxic Psychiatry, Medication Madness, Psychiatric Drug Withdrawal, and now, Guilt, Shame, and Anxiety, Understanding and Overcoming Negative Emotions. Welcome to the Dr. Peter Breggin Hour.
Well, hello again, my wonderful audience. And there's my wonderful guest, Catherine Austin Fitts, F-I-T-T-S. Folks, one of the great things about my having stepped out of my box of decades and decades, not entirely a box, but mostly about psychiatric reform and standing up to the pharmaceutical industry and so on and on. But getting involved in COVID-19 has given me a chance to meet some of the most interesting people of my entire life, some of the smartest, brightest, most dedicated human beings. And Catherine Austin Fitts is one of these people. And to make it even more wonderful, I think she came to me first, unless Ginger reached out to you. And you've known me, you've known my work for years and years and years, which, you often hear this on the show, folks. I reach out to people and it turns out they read me 30 years ago. Maybe they forgot about me for 20 and we're back again. So we have a very interesting show today on the Dr. Peter Breggin Hour. And as always, I want to start out thanking PRN-FM. Because that's the radio branch that I started with years ago, and thank them for letting me just take that show and also turn it into my own video TV show once a week. And every Wednesday at 5 p.m. we do the radio show, and then the TV show follows soon. And something very interesting, it is now one day after the election when you watch this. Oh my. So that's going to be interesting. This is going to appear on the Wednesday after the election. And one of the things I hadn't thought about in my spontaneous way in talking with Catherine is whether maybe we should talk about what if this scenario or that scenario. What if one man wins? What if the other man wins? What if nobody wins, which is now a possibility with all the shenanigans that go on. But maybe we'll get to that. Catherine has a really interesting background. She was actually, I'm going to read this, she was Assistant Secretary of Housing. And was this to the Federal Housing Commissioner? Is that what that is explaining? And we've never... And this is under Georgia, and it's in the Department of Housing and Urban Development. She is now an independent financial advisor. Is that fair to say?
So I have two companies. One is Solari Report, which is the media component, and our focus is on helping people have a free and inspired life is the goal. And then I have an investment advisory company, but I no longer do investment advisory for individuals. We do a ESG screen called Solari World. So it's providing for a money manager, it's providing lists of stocks of companies that are not engaged in intentional organized crime.
That rules out the entire pharmaceutical industry, doesn't it?
Pretty much. I think we have one. Pharmaceutical.
And it's not going to be much better in agriculture, is it?
No, that's a real fight trying to find something in agriculture.
Oh my gosh. And then the military-industrial complex. So it'd be very interesting if you feel up to it to make a few recommendations if you like along the way.
No, I never make recommendations.
Well, that's a relief, actually. We are talking to Catherine in the Netherlands. She moves around the world. She moves around the country. She's just has so much information. And she gave me one of her reports. This is a big thing. I don't know how much it can show here, but this is called the Solari report, and it's the state of our currencies, subtitled The End of Currencies. And I've just been learning a lot about it, and a lot about what to me is a very, very big issue, which is what is globalization? Because more than I ever expected, when I got into looking at this epidemic, it took on mammoth interlocking proportions. And, first I noticed how Fauci is so involved with the drug companies and has been his whole life. And then I noticed he's involved with Bill Gates and is actually one of his top advisors in his vaccine committee at the foundation. And then I began to realize that Bill Gates was interfering with a lot of my favorite people and favorite projects in the world, including what happened to Peter Goetze, a wonderful internist and researcher who founded something called I'm probably going to block on it right now, but it'll come back to me. But the Cochrane, and that was kind of a monitor of research, sort of an overseer of research. And
Right.
Gates intervened, and he's not with his own organization anymore, which happens to people, probably a lot of people you and I know. So where do you want to take off? This is the kind of the mysterious, amazing world I'm looking at, that you have been looking at for decades, probably. And it might enlighten our folks if you would talk about this other world that actually rules this world in a predatory manner. It's very predatory in its relationship to COVID-19. But maybe I'm preempting too much, and let me just let you go now and talk.
So let me start out, though, at an intimate level. I originally started to do the Solari report. I mean, I'm an investment banker. And so the idea, there were two things I said I would never do. One was media and the other was investment advisory. And of course, what am I doing now? I'm doing media and investment advisory. So I never thought I would do anything related to media, but literally I had, both in the Bush administration and then in the Clinton administration, two experiences with, one was with the New York Times and the other was with, the Bush administration was the New York Times, and then the Clinton administration was the Washington Post. And what you were talking about was top corporate newspapers willing to lie, cheat, steal, break the law, engage in RICO conspiracy. And I realized when I had the second experience with the Washington Post during the Clinton administration, I said, I'm never going to talk to corporate media again, ever. I'm going to talk to people. So if somebody asks me a question, I'm going to answer them by email. I'm just going to go direct. And then when I started an investment advisory company, so I started to do radios and speak publicly, which for someone like me was very, very strange. I was used to only talking to 20 people at the jockey club or on the trading floor. You didn't talk to a million people. Anyway, but in the process of doing that, Peter, what I discovered is many people really don't know how money works around them. They can't walk into a town and map out, I call it how the money works, but it's really how does the time and what is the mathematics of time and resources in that place or in that family or in that, sort of state. Anyway, so I began a process of speaking with lots of different reporters and helping people as a researcher. And that's how I started to learn about psychiatric drugs and all the problems. That's what got me into that world, and you and John Rappaport, all these wonderful people. Anyway, so when I started the investment advisory company in 2007, I discovered that I had these wonderful clients, and I had 50 clients asking me the same question every week. So I realized I can't answer this question 50 times in 1 week by phone. What I have to do is I have to batch it, and that became the Solari report. And one of the great things about the Solari report is you basically get to travel the world and talk to who you want, because I'm only trying to present to my audience, the people I think can give them the best advice, the best understanding, so it's a very high filter. And of course, so you were immediately chosen to make the filter, no problem. Anyway, but you have these wonderful moments where you discover how little you know as you bring in these people and you start to ask and invite them to sort of illuminate their different areas. So I'm looking at the map you just made of all the different cartels around the world. So you invite people in from different networks and cartels. So I want to tell you one of my favorite moments when I got quite a big education and wake-up call on the Solari Report. I was interviewing somebody named Dr. William Tiller. Are you familiar with his work?
No.
Dr. Tiller was head of material sciences at Stanford, and he was able to raise private funding to do research on whether human intention could change material reality, including at great distances. And he was, in fact, able to prove that it could. This all gets back to the idea of, visioning, having a vision of where you want to go and the importance of having a vision. Anyway, so I had Dr. Tiller on the Solari Report, and I was doing the pre-interview, and I said to him, Dr. Tiller, I'm very interested in community prayer. What do you think about it? And he stopped and he said, well, you have to be very, very careful. He said, because if the people doing the praying are coherent, it can have a very positive impact. But if the people doing the praying are incoherent, it can have a very negative impact. And a light bulb went off in my mind, and I said, I need to get more grounded and more coherent. And our goal, one of my goals with the Solari Report, is to aggregate and digest the news about what's going on in a way that someone can make sense of a very incoherent. The media presents you with a very incoherent picture, and it seems very dystopian or Orwellian. Doesn't make any sense. But our goal is to digest things and present them week to week and quarter to quarter and year to year, so that with very little of your time, you can understand what's going on and have a map to navigate in a way that you can stay coherent. And I think one of the major tactics that you and I are looking at with what's one guy, C.J. Hopkins, calls it the COVIDian cult, is they're doing thousands of things designed to destroy your coherence. And if you allow yourself to be in a state of incoherence, you give up your power to create your future. So
That's well put.
Right. So, I said you're the master of the intimate space, not me. I'm a cold calculating investment banker. But I think my goal for our conversation today is what can you and I share that will help our audience navigate this environment and be able to protect and maintain their state of coherence. And before I finish that thought, I just want to tell you one story. Somebody sent me a video yesterday, and I looked at it, and I literally felt like calling you and saying, can I get a consultation? It was I think it was Oregon. It was a doctor from one of the states and her colleague. I don't know if her colleague was a doctor. And the doctor was dressed up as a clown with clown makeup on her face. And the other person was dressed up with, I think the riff was Halloween, but it was it was designed to put you in a state of terror and incoherence. And they looked scared to death. They looked, I don't know what somebody had, basically they looked like, either they did this or they would lose their job. But it's the health officer of the state, and they looked, it was so cult-like that it was frightening. Totally frightening. Anyway, and I thought, what they're trying to do is they're trying to make everyone incoherent.
So interesting.
Right.
There is a long academic field of study about fear in public health.
Right.
So the public health people study how to engender fear, and they call it fear appeal. It's very odd. Imagine fear appeal, appealing to people by scaring them. And one of the seminal papers says it's not just enough to put out, fearful messages. You have to make people feel it personally,
Right.
and then use the fear by telling them what to do, like wear your mask,
Right.
like 6 feet apart, and with whatever legitimacy that has, and it's scientifically very uncertain at all, it certainly gets you in charge of people, in control of people. And from there, you can begin to exercise more and more different kinds of control. So I think one of the most important things, and you're saying this about maintaining your coherence, I tend to call it irrationality. I think coherence is a great word, great concept. To maintain your coherence, your rationality, and your loving attitude, I would put those together. And your state of ethics, rationality, are very close, and love, they're all tied in together in my basket on.
So the number one concern I hear from my subscribers is, and I've experienced that when I was litigating with the federal government, I experienced the same process. It's remarkably how similar the process is when they attack you individually in that way to what's happening now. But what they're discovering is literally their whole personal Rolodex, whether it's their family, their friends, their colleagues, is being torn asunder by the divide and conquer, as well as the different, some people believe the official reality on COVID-19 and some people don't. And so your position in the COVID cult and your position in divide and conquer is literally tearing families apart. And you really see it when and I saw this as an investment advisor. I had a tremendous number of clients who had dealt with healthcare fraud, usually vaccine injury or death, but others as well. And you would get these situations where one parent or one grandparent understood the dangers of vaccination and not just the health ramifications, but the financial ramifications. And, another spouse didn't, or another child or grandchild, you had part of the family who understood the danger and the risk, and another part of the family who didn't. And it could literally tear a family apart.
Yeah.
And, I often talk about the fact there was one of the mothers in Vax in the documentary described the fact that a heavily autistic child will cost the family present value $5 million over the life of that child. And the question, of course, is how much is the family going to have to pony up versus government or other services? And, one of the fights I used to get in with a grandparent.
Well, who's going to benefit? Who's going to get all that money?
Exactly. Well, so I used to say to a grandparent who would say, well, it's my, this would come up with grandchildren. They would say, it's my child's decision. And I said, well, and they said, I can't interfere. I said, well, here's the problem. It's your $5 million because your child doesn't have $5 million. So if you end up with a heavily autistic grandchild, it's going to be your $5 million. Spend that $5 million on helping your family be successful, or you can spend it on an autistic grandchild.
Wow.
It's, the risk issue is yours, not your kids. That's the practical reality. Anyway, so, one of my frustrations with being an investment advisor, several of my frustrations, you just managed one. Many financial providers sell products and services using what I describe as fear porn. And so, you throw a huge amount of disinformation at somebody, you get them in a state of fear, and then you try and solve their fear by whatever it is you're selling. So part of it was I was constantly having to beat back the fear porn players. But, part of the other problem was the number one financial risk that families had came from health or the kind of political risks we're looking at, not from finance. And in a low yield environment, Peter, there's not enough money in the world you can make investing in the national security state to make up for poor health that comes from not taking proper care, not eating. Somebody with $5 million in their brokerage account would tell me they can't afford organic food. I thought, that's the stupidest financial decision I've ever heard. It was so coming back to helping our audience, I just want to say a couple things about what I've seen that I think would help people navigate this environment. The first thing is I'm a great believer that it can help you tremendously to understand how what's driving the political and economic environment. And so one of the reasons I wrote State of Our Currencies is so people could understand. To me, COVID-19 is just a marketing op for what the central bankers are up to. And so if you can understand what the central bankers are up to and see how it translates into your individual life, it can help you navigate. It's a map. Okay. But then coming back to what we were just describing, how do you navigate the fact that you've got a map and some other people not only don't have it, but they don't want it? So I'll give you an example. I live in Hickory Valley and I live next to my cousin. And my cousin traditionally has cared very much about, she's a farmer's wife. She cares about providing nutrition to her husband, her son. They're all farmers. It's really important to eat well before you get out there for a 10-hour, 12-hour day on the farm. She kept feeding her grandkids food from the fast food stores. And I kept trying to warn her. And finally, I got her to watch Super Size Me, which is a documentary about the risks of eating that kind of food. It's extraordinary amount of sugar, et cetera, et cetera. And she came over to see me, and it took me years, and I just had to bully her into doing it. She came over and she said to me, Peter, she said, "Oh my God, I can't believe I'm feeding the kids this kind of food. I will never give them this kind of food again." 3 weeks later, I was going into Memphis to take her grandkids to the museum. And she said to me, "The kids are hungry. Why don't you stop at this fast food restaurant and get them some things to eat?" It was like a complete memory wipe. She had completely forgotten.
What do you make out of that?
Well, I think in this environment, there is a tremendous effort. I attribute a lot to entrainment technology and subliminal programming on TV. When I was on Wall Street, I think I told you this the last time we talked. I heard a couple of billionaires talking about entrainment technology and subliminal programming that would roll out on TV. And it scared me to death. And that was it for me in TV. But I think that technology, whether it's on TV or smartphones, if you look at an audience of people who understand a lot about what's going on, what you will find is they have a history of not watching TV, and they're not always on their smartphones. They tend to stay away from media, and they tend to be hugging trees much more than on the TV. And
so when they get on the TV, they're more aware of how they're being manipulated than the rest of us might be. What you're saying?
They just seem to avoid it. And to a certain extent, I've seen this before. Now, the other thing is, some people can hold an independent mind and an independent field separate from the crowd. So, for example, when I was in Washington, I worked for a cabinet secretary who literally used to have psychotic episodes. And the whole principal staff would kind of go with him to do really, they talk each other into doing really crazy things. And there were three of us who just wouldn't go. And I could never figure out what is it about the three of us who don't. But I'm a person who can come to a conclusion. Mathematics is my tool. So I want to look at the mathematics of time, and I want to look at the mathematics of money. The mathematics of time and money say, this the building is there. You can hold a gun to my head and say that the building's not there, and I'm going to say no, it is there. I can hold an independent thought. I don't need to go with the crowd. So, if the guys in the White House decide to, what was it the Carl Rove guy once said? We're an empire now. We make up our own reality. I'm one of those people who needs a mathematically sound, fact-based reality, and the whole crowd can go to the right, and I'll just stand there. I
think this is an incredibly, incredibly important, and begins to touch on what can people do in their personal spaces. It really is possible, folks, to keep your own sense of reality regardless of what's happening around you.
Right.
It really is possible.
So how do we do that?
Well, one of the things is to really identify fear and intimidation. And if you listen to most of what's in the major media right now, it's all fear and intimidation.
Right.
People aren't even, on the left, aren't even saying what their programs are. They're just saying Trump is a monster, Trump will do this, Trump will do that. They're saying the virus is going to destroy us and Trump won't listen. I just did this, and I sent it to you. I did this blog and with Ginger, and then a video on what happens. And this is now the day after the election. Again, I have to remind myself it's being played. What's going to happen if Biden wins? And Biden has told us what's going to happen. He says, I know he's not exactly a man of his word, but he says as soon as it's confirmed that he's won the election, he's going to get on the phone. The first person he's going to call is Fauci, tell him to stay on. And of course, he's hardly even on right now with Trump. So he's going to really bring him back.
Right.
And we're going to have a fear society with a dictatorship of pseudoscience between.
Well, my question is, are we going to have an engineered plague?
Well, that now takes us way into more fear.
No, because I'm a great believer that if you, for
an engineered plague, I think you mean a fake one mostly.
No, fake or real, or a combination thereof. In other words, I think they're perfectly happy to use fake unless they want to really downsize the population. But I do not put it past them to, if you look at what they're trying to accomplish, I think intentional targeting of the population with pathogens, we're dealing with chemical warfare now. I would say that the toxicity levels of Americans have been rising steadily, and whether it's vaccine injury and disability, or some of the stuff that's in the spraying, or what they've been doing with the food supply. We're the targets of a poisoning, and American people are being poisoned.
It fits very much what you're saying, and I generally don't, even let my personal conversations go into this kind of an area. But what really fits with it is what they've been doing with the drugs. NIH is now, and this is in my new very short blog and very short video, I think they're really good. What NIH has now done is, without any particular lawfulness about it, they've set out guidelines for the treatment of COVID-19. It's very recent. And the guidelines include that you can't have any antiviral agent until you go to the hospital and are on, go to the hospital and are on oxygen.
So
that was my initial.
Oh my
They're
God.
trying to get people to die.
Right.
I mean, I used to think the major motive here was to hold down things like hydroxychloroquine because they couldn't make any money on them,
No.
and to then thereby gin up all the money they're going to make on crap like remdesivir, which even now I said from the beginning doesn't work, and they're now admitting doesn't work,
Right.
um, and um, and also to get the vaccines, to get everybody scared to get the vaccines. Just make money. Pharmaceutical companies and all these big intellectual companies making tons of money. But this is a little beyond that to try to deprive people of any treatment. And
So here's the thing: if you cannot achieve a balanced budget, and that's what they tried to do in '95, literally the next month was when they approved OxyContin, and they launched all the predatory lending. And what you have to understand is the opioids and the predatory lending targeted the same neighborhoods. It was if you look at what happened with the pharmaceuticals and the drugs, including the illegal narcotics, you were watching low income neighborhoods absolutely targeted with a combination of things which was going to destroy them. It was basically an invasion. It was an addiction evasion.
there's a concept that you were expressing in your uh, most recent thing, the state of our currencies, your Solari report, where I got the image of this huge globalist interlocking. They're competitive with each other, but they're also cooperative with each other, and they all want to be predators on the earth, predate the earth. And that one of the images was that they're sucking the life out of the poor and the middle class and just shifting all the wealth up, so that it made us not so much consumers as victims of predation.
So one of the things, if you look at the process of globalization, what they would argue is um, that a significant amount of people in the globally have increased their per capita income. So the squeeze, they pulled capital out of the United States. That put the squeeze on the middle class here, and in the developed world. And I recommended to you that you watch the Sir James Goldsmith video. He does an absolutely brilliant job, and this is in 1994, of warning that this is going to destroy the middle class if you pull capital and use technology in this way. And it's the most accurate, brilliant description of globalization that's ever been done, and it still is prescient and relevant today in 1994.
So let's go back to what your initial intention was, which is to help the folks have enough
Right.
information to navigate. And I think one of the things is you really have to start thinking for yourself.
Right.
You said something to me earlier before we were on the air, and you said, well, you can't trust this data and statistics anymore, so I travel around the country to see what people are doing and how they're doing.
Right.
It's just like we can't trust the data about whether Trump was going to win yesterday or not.
Right.
It's all concocted. It's all manipulated. You can't trust anything that most of the media is saying. Most of the newspapers and so on and so forth. And that's going to encourage you to start looking and listening elsewhere.
Right.
To find alternative newspapers, alternative media, alternative people. But folks, I mean, you really have to think for yourself now because, for example, there's this huge scandal going on in terms of discovery of all the money that the Bidens have been sucking out of the various countries been going to, and mostly through Joe Biden's son, but also his brother himself, and that's not being covered. I mean, I couldn't Google it for a week. I mean, now you can Google it a little bit, and they tried to literally take the New York Post, the fourth largest newspapers. Everything it said had been taken off of Twitter and other sources, So we're in a world where you can get ideas that have no reality. They're just concocted to make you more of a sheep, to make you angrier, to make you scared, to make you obedient to the masters, they're really not anymore the conservatives, folks. I mean,
Well, you know,
all
it's
this
interesting though.
is coming from progressives, this stuff mostly.
Oh, it's coming from everybody. I mean,
Everybody,
it's coming
okay,
from all.
everybody.
So, but what's interesting is for 20 plus years since I left Washington, what I keep hearing from people is it couldn't really be that bad. In other words, it couldn't have gotten that bad and me not know it. So I don't believe you. I don't believe that reality is that far away from the official reality. And now with COVID-19, people are starting to say, oh my God, you know, the central control has become that extraordinary and the lies have become that extraordinary. And now I accept, you know, that this could really be happening. You know, it's a little bit
Well,
like that scene.
that's definitely been happening to me.
Right.
That is
It's like
definitely.
that scene in Rosemary's Baby when she says, "Oh my God, this is really happening."
I don't go to horror movies.
but
Yeah.
you know, I think many people have not believed that the central control is extraordinary as it has become, and now they're beginning to realize, oh, you know, it really is. And you do have a group of people, you know, it's very, you know this better than I. It's very hard for people who have empathy to appreciate that there is a portion of the population that doesn't have any empathy.
Mm-hmm. And they're the ones that get the most power. They get the power because they're willing to manipulate. They're willing to dispose of anybody along the way, literally or figuratively.
Right.
They're the ones that will go and, you know, take tons of money for making promises to become politicians, or like Fauci to just, you know, work with the big money to stay for 40 years or whatever in his position and grow in power and wealthy controls. So the problem is that the people who rise to the top, as I've been watching the culture over these years, they often have two qualities, and this is just short of the top because I don't really get to know the people at the top that much. But first, as you said, they lack empathy, but they also lack critical intelligence.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons you can't trust the media, folks. Like when I first started, I did a ton of media years ago before it just got shut down, not just for me, but all critical thinkers. But I was on everything. I was on, you know, Larry King multiple times, Oprah multiple times, every morning show, everything, 20,
Right.
60 minutes, whatever there was, I was on. And then it slowed down and stopped. But what I noticed was that the most intelligent conversations, and this is almost becoming an axiom, the most intelligent conversations I would have would be the limo driver on the way to the station. And then the most intelligent conversation I would have at the station would be in a small town, small area radio show host.
Right.
All that's beginning to disappear now. The radio show hosts and so on that are small town in this top down. It's been a big change. I mean, see lots of, you know, you'd have an LA TV show that was good, New York TV show, Chicago. You don't have any of that stuff anymore. But it was always that it was clear as I rose through the ranks, so that when I got to 2020 and 60 Minutes, they were the most stupid media people I'd met. And they had made themselves, not that their IQs were necessarily low, they were shrewd, cagey, but they knew less about life and what was going on in life, and were more docile to the prevailing power structure than the ordinary person was.
Right.
Now, there's going to be people above them that are pulling their strings, but I mean, I just don't know about that. You've been more in the, you know, toward the top of the governing folks than I have. Do you think this changes, this scenario? First, do you think there's a real scenario, and does it change when you get more to the top?
So if you look at our economic model, what the people managing the country discovered in the United States was that as long as they gave the citizen two things, they could do whatever they wanted. The first thing was a check, so they had to cut them into, some of the war profits, if you will. So they're making a fortune on war and organized crime, and as long as they cut you in on, so one, you want a check, you want to share, but the other thing is you want a story of why you're good and you're not doing any of this stuff. So you're getting like a royalty from the organized crime operation, but you get to pretend you're a good Christian and you're not doing any of that stuff. So you get the story of I am good. One of the things I discovered when I left Washington and started to do radio shows and start to tell people, I was trying to warn them about the narcotics trafficking that was happening literally in every neighborhood. I mean, it was killing kids. And what I discovered is the average person would get angry at me because I was taking away their story of I am good. They didn't want to know. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the general culpability, I mean, the most important thing, I think, to solving a problem is you have to own it. You have to say, it's my problem. I take responsibility for it. I own it. I'm going to solve it. I have the power to solve it. The reality is, if you look at how the money works, did I ever tell you my red button story? I think I did. What the red button story says is, we have to own this problem because we're culpable. We were happy to get the check, especially after Kennedy was assassinated, because the guys at the top couldn't believe they'd gotten away with it, and the people would go along. And the more they could get people to go along, the more empowered they got, and the worse it got. So let me tell you the red button problem. The red button story, I was asked in the summer of 2000 to give a speech to a wonderful group of people called Spiritual Frontiers Foundation International. And they have a conference once a year to talk about how we can help evolve our society spiritually. They're very well educated, very nice people. And I was asked by a healthcare practitioner to give a speech called How the Money Works on Organized Crime. And it was meant to be light and funny to show you how organized crime money intersected with Wall Street in Washington. So I'm in the middle of the speech in front of this wonderful group of 100 people. I'm talking about the congressional testimony on the Dark Alliance, Gary Webb allegations about intelligence agencies bringing in drugs to Mena, Arkansas. It's the Clintons and the Bushes working together and bringing drugs into South Central LA. So I say to this wonderful group of people, what would happen? During the congressional testimony, I was working with a reporter who was told by the Department of Justice spokesperson that the American economy launders $500 billion to $1 trillion a year in 1998 of all dirty money. So I said to this wonderful audience, what would happen if we stopped being the global leader in $500 billion to $1 trillion a year of money? And the audience had a little discussion, and they said, well, our taxes would go up because we'd have trouble financing the government deficit, and our government checks might stop, and that money would leave the New York Stock Exchange and go to Hong Kong or Singapore or Zurich or London, so our IRAs would go down in value. And I said, okay, let's pretend there's a big red button up here on the lectern. And if you push that button, you can stop all hard narcotics trafficking in your city, your town, your county, your state tomorrow, thus offending the people who control many decades of $500 billion to $1 trillion a year, and the reinvestment they're on. Who here will push the button? And out of 100 people dedicated to evolving our society spiritually, only one would push the button. So I said, 99, why would you not push the button? And they said, we don't want our taxes to go up. We don't want our government checks to stop. And we don't want our IRAs to go down in value. Which means, Peter, if tomorrow we made you president, or yesterday we made you president in the United States, the next day, today, your political guy would walk in and say, okay, Peter, we just spent $5 billion covertly and overtly to get you reelected. Now everybody in America wants their check. They want their housing subsidy check. They want their water and sewer grant. They want their community block development. They want their defense contractor, on and on and on. So you're going to turn to your Secretary of Treasury and you're going to say, well, you better be nice to the people who control 500 billion to $1 trillion because everybody wants their check. And so your job as a politician is to get them the check and then give them a story of, don't worry, you're good Christians. Don't worry about what's going on. I'm taking care of it. I'm going to drain the swamp. But you can't.
Do you think Trump has been trying to defy this?
I
think he didn't know it really existed fully till he got there.
I don't think Trump understood the details of how the swamp worked. If you are a person like Trump, you're busy and you understand things conceptually, but you haven't gotten to the detail. I don't think he understood the kind of machinery and the depth of the machinery into the bureaucracy. And so, but I think
Trump, who of us did? I mean, who of us did understand until he...
Actually, no,
I didn't.
There were a lot of people who understood who've been trying to say something. But again, most people couldn't fathom that what we were saying was true. But there have been a lot of people who've been trying to explain this, and there's a lot of books and writing and documentaries and all. Anyway.
Was that what you were fundamentally attacked over, that you were talking about this stuff?
I was attacked because I was building a software tool called Community Wizard. And that software tool would have stopped the housing bubble from happening because it would have allowed the small business people and the citizens in a neighborhood to see how all the federal taxpayer dollars were allocated in that place. In other words, if you own a stock, you get an annual report from the publicly traded company you own stock in. What I said is you need the same thing for your congressional district. You need to see sources and uses of how all the taxpayer resources work for your congressional district. And if you, in fact, as of 1996, could have seen that when they seized and destroyed Community Wizard, in fact, a lot of the corruption we're discussing now could never have happened. Because people would have understood how they could make money pushing the red button. I call it turning the red button green, because instead of the Main Street economy being destroyed over the last 20 or 30 years, Main Street could have taken that information and built a much more powerful, politically powerful and wealthier economy.
If Trump is now the president, are you optimistic at all?
No. Not, I don't think.
I wish you had said that.
I'm optimistic about the future of human civilization. I'm not optimistic that solutions can come from a centralized mechanism. In other words,
that makes sense. That's right. It makes a lot of sense because you're repeating the problem.
Right. So here's the thing. I always try to tell people, if you've studied the Kennedy assassination, you understand that the Secret Service guns turn out and in. So how much can Trump do as a practical matter? And I won't even say Trump. How much can one person do in a highly centralized system, which is deeply dependent on warfare and organized crime? That's your problem. And what the red button story tells you is the American people, to make a major change in Washington, Peter, you need an 80% or better support from the population. You got to get 80 people in that audience to say, push the red button, to hell with organized crime. We're going to push the red button.
That's interesting. I suspect all you need is 10% dedicated. I mean, really.
10% is what you need to win the war. So you don't need everybody, but you do need a group.
Then you need to get, most of the people on your side. I doubt if George Washington had 80% of the people on his side.
No. No, with that I agree. In terms of getting a revolution done, you only need 10%.
Okay.
Right.
Well, I see what you're saying. We're going to transform the world. We're going to have to get a lot of people believing in something different, a different model.
Well, but this comes back to consciousness. And and why I say it's so important to take responsibility and own the problem. Because if you look at how many people have been making money on what the pharmaceutical companies have been doing, on the financial fraud, on the predatory student loans, on education, which is harvesting kids. I mean, if you go through all the swampy behavior that's been happening sea to shining sea, there are, out of 325 million people, we got a lot of guilty people. Okay. So it's not just the top guys who need to come clean, it's the rest of us.
Mm-hmm.
And are you a Jung fan at all?
I think for the very reasons you may love him, I found him distressing when I was young and read him a lot.
No,
I also didn't. You're talking about Carl Jung?
Yeah, I don't love Jung, but I love this one story.
Oh, okay.
So Jung, did you ever hear the
He was
story?
also an anti-Semite. Go ahead.
Oh, really? Did you ever hear the story of the aristocratic woman who came to see him and wouldn't tell him her name?
No.
Okay. So aristocratic woman comes to see him, tells him she's not going to give his name. She's only going to come once and then she'll never see him again. And here's her story. As a young woman, she's from a very wealthy upper crust family. She had gone to medical school, had fallen in love with her best friend's husband. When she couldn't reconcile the tension, she murdered her best friend and got away with it, married the husband. Right after she married him, she got pregnant, and then everything started to go wrong. She had beautiful wolfhounds. They died. She was an accomplished horsewoman. Her horses would always buck and rear, and she had to give up riding. And her daughter was born, hated her, and as soon as she could run away, she ran off. She had no idea where she was. And basically, she told Jung, she said, no matter where she was, the birds would stop singing. She said the birds knew. So her guilt over murdering her best friend had poisoned her life. Okay. And she felt that if she confessed to Jung, perhaps she could clear, by confession, she could clear her sins and maybe have a life again. Now, what I will tell you is America has that problem. If you go town by town, county by county, the birds have stopped singing because they know. They know what we've been doing individually and collectively, and we have to face that, and we all have to come clean.
It's interesting that you use the bird metaphor. I guess you probably don't know this about me, but much of my pleasure is organized around birds. And
really,
I'm sitting next to it's covered right now. The only thing I changed in the house, Ginger made some board modifications, was I actually put in a huge glass window, the largest that could be shipped safely, or that they would ship, at the end of my office, right on my left here.
Wow.
And outside are 3 bird feeders on a balcony, and then down below are 2, and then down in the other direction there are 3 or 4. And I'm very near the Audubon Society, the Cornell, it's not the Audubon Society, but Cornell's very famous bird institute. And the birds are all over here. And they provide me endless, wonderful entertainment. The hawks are here too, and now we've had a very aggressive mink has appeared because I have a little creek and a little waterfall. So I feel the birds are still singing somehow, but let me see what I can do here. We're getting pretty near the end. We've just been talking now for quite a while. I think we've been talking for an hour. I think just about maybe 5 or 6 minutes short of an hour, 7 minutes short of an hour. I want to tell people that I think that the issue you raised in the beginning about keeping your own inner space rational, and I would add to it loving. What was the word you used? I thought it was a good word. Coherent, keeping it coherent. That it will enable you to keep the best possible life going.
Right.
And I think that I learned this from a few different places in my life because I kind of knew this. I wasn't able to implement it as fully as I wanted until Ginger came into my life, and that was God's mercy. I was too stupid too afraid to do anything the first time I met her. But I grew up. I was raised essentially by starting with a 16-year-old black child out of Georgia, I think, who my parents brought up to take care of me because my mother already had a son and she didn't want to deal with any more men in her life. So I grew up essentially, the not very respected maid's son, and that was my attitude was that we took care of each other and defended each other. So I grew up with a sense that, okay, you have this one person, everything's okay.
Right.
And then they took her out of my life when I was 4.5.
Oh.
Just gone. And I forgot about her until many years later, many years later. Completely blanked out the memory. Went into kind of a dark age until 6th grade, until I was around 12. And then I began to sort of awaken in this amazing fashion that everybody.
Where were you? Where did you grow
Long
up?
Island, a Jewish family in
Where?
Long Island.
Where on Long Island?
Woodmere, Hewlett, Limbrook.
Yeah.
And during the time I was growing up, World War II was going on. And I had nobody to discuss it with, but we would go to the beach and I would see the detritus floating in the water. That was the result of the submarines, our shipping being sunk by the submarines off of Long Island. And then at the end of that, I was sitting in the movies with my parents, and Movie Film News put on my first introduction to the Holocaust, heaps of Jews against wire fences being liberated. Then my uncle came back. He had been one of the liberators. He told me about it. And I really got a sense along the way that it was, this whole world will destroy you, but there's love. And so I had this unique experience, I think, of being loved.
Right.
During those formative years. And I carried it with me. And to this day, I've been convinced that what we do is we live as honestly in this world as we can. We don't let anybody intimidate us or make us afraid. If we start getting afraid, we do not react to it. We figure out where does reason and love take us.
Right. And I would also add, it's very interesting if you look at how intelligence works. To me, love is the electricity that allows intelligence to connect. And so there's no such thing as shared intelligence without love.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. And so, where there is love and intelligence is free to connect and operate, it's extraordinary the things that can happen. But there can't be social distancing.
Ain't gonna work. No.
Well, I think that's why they want all these things. They're trying to shut down that shared intelligence. And
that's really a wonderful concept of where there's love, there's shared intelligence. And a part of that, I think, is that when there's love, the other person's interests approximate your own or even exceed your own. People commonly sacrifice their lives for loved ones, children, family. If you're sharing intelligence and you love the other person and you're taking their needs as seriously as your own, it's a miracle. Right. That's the miracle. I've never put it that way before exactly. So I've written and talked about these things a lot. But that's the miracle.
Well, I told you the most powerful divide and conquer to try and get central political control is to turn men and women against each other. And if you
Hmm.
can heal that, if you can heal that game, then all the others can't work. You know, it cascades out. But to me, that's the one that has to be. And in terms of navigating our environment, what I discovered being an investment advisor is when it comes to financial fraud, you can trick a man, you can trick a woman, but it's very hard to trick a man and woman working together. So in terms of navigating, you know, sort of all the lies in this environment, if there's any reason to heal your divide and conquer, you're going to get your shared intelligence is going to go up a lot.
I like that. We need to end, I think. And I think I probably run over for. That's a perfect ending. I really like that.
Okay.
This is Catherine Austin Fitz, and folks have heard me say this a few times now. A new friend, a new person to love,
Yeah.
admire, learn from.
Yeah.
It's just amazing, and I have no idea how this show will be greeted. I have no idea what I think of it. I think it's really interesting, really interesting, and I actually think you know things I don't know a lot. So
I'm
listen.
shipping you a whole bunch of our wrap-ups. So take a look, and if you want to have another conversation, let me know.
Oh God, yeah, we will just stay in touch.
Okay.
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
and
Peter.
folks, let me remind you, take this seriously, and thank you for taking this seriously, because the one thing I do try to do is really give you serious stuff to think about.
Yeah.
Bless all of you, whoever is the president of the United States now, one day after the election, may you be struck with truth and with love.
Amen.
Bye, everybody.